Kill it and grill it. Let's talk about Tiefling Tale with Turnips. Welcome to my channel. I focus on tabletop role-playing games, video games, and science fiction. Full confession, I actually wrote this up in a blog post back in 2014, so I'm stealing from my own stuff that I wrote several years ago. First off, a little setup about this, about Tieflings and Tiefling Tale. The World of Tiglath campaign, the very first iteration that I ran on it back in 2014, is a very rough world, and one of the player characters was a Tiefling. And she got into some trouble, and her tail was cut off, along with certain other things that I won't go into. So this is probably not safe for work. It's got some adult themes. No adult language, but some adult themes in this. I'm going to try and act out a little bit of the story that I wrote up for what happened. And the little bit of setup. This is, you have Gur, who is a soldier who acquired the tail off the player character. And then you have Offal. I'll let you figure out what Offal is. This is Gur gingerly approached Offal's tent. His name was not really Offal. It was Offell, but nearly everyone in the regiment called him Offal. Offal was not human. The regimental historians mentioned Offal nearly 100 years ago. Offal crafted the regimental ceremonial drinking cups from the skulls of the defeated enemies. A humanoid creature emerged from the tent. Intricately carved black leather armor enveloped the bony frame. The dark armor provided a stark contrast to the pale, variegated, dry, gray, wrinkled skin. Offal showed some jagged, greenish teeth and said, "There's a spring in your step, Gur. Did you get some tail?" A slight blush crossed Gur's face as he replied, "In more ways than one." Gur handed Offal a blood-soaked, rough canvas bag. Gur opened the bag, pulled out a long, bloody tail. After careful examination, he said, "Tiefling?" Gur nodded yes. Offal brought the tail up to the holes in his face that served as a nose, sniffed deeply and said, "Young female Tiefling." Gur smiled and replied, "That's why there's a spring in my step." He says, Offal said, "I'll give you 20 gold for it." Gur said, "No, I want it as a trophy." "Ah, I understand. That will cost you." "How much?" Gur asked. Offal said, "I can tan the skin and stuff it for 10. If you want the bones as a parapt, that will cost you another 300. Gur muttered, "I ain't no officer. Can't afford more than 50. Make it 55, and I get to keep the meat." Inwardly, Gur shuddered at the thought of Offal and the meat of the Tiefling. Gur said, "All I got's is 53. Offal hefted the tail and said, "Must be a good 10 pounds of meat." He licked the bloody cut end of the tail. Licking his crap lips with his purplish black tongue, Offal said, "Okay, 53 it is." Gur handed Offal a small bag of coins. Offal said, "Give me a couple of weeks." Gur quickly left. Offal retrieved his finest scalpel. He honed the scalpel on an oil stone. Offal was careful to make sure no one saw the lubricant for the oil stone. He doubted the regiment would allow anyone to live who created oil by extracting it from the bodies of human babies. It only took a couple of drops to hone the scalpel. Offal used the scalpel to remove the skin from the tail. Held the regimental record for skinning prisoners. Offal never entered the skinning competitions. He knew his decades of experience, speed, and skill would frighten the regiment and end his meal ticket. Offal boned the tail, piling up all the bones in a large bowl. He took out a pair of bones. He took the bowl of bones over to a rack of amphora. He placed the bones in the bottom of an empty amphora. Offal pulled on a pair of heavy leather gloves before opening one of the sealed amphora. Carrion beetles normally ate dead flesh. Offal had scars on his hands, proving the beetles could not tell that he was alive. The confusion of the beetles was justified. Offal opened the amphora. He scooped up handfuls of detritus rich with beetles to cover the bones. Offal knew the beetles would expertly clean the bones of any remaining meat and connective tissue. Offal now returned his attention to the meat. He dug through his pantry, selecting some small turnips. He skewered the meat, alternating chunks of tiefling with small turnips. Offal liked his meat bloody rare and hot with burnt edges. The crisp texture of the turnips gave a contrast to the tender meat. Offal reminisced it had been almost 50 years since his last taste of tiefling flesh. Tiefling was sweeter and less gamey than elf. Offal licked his dry, cracked lips, enjoying the smooth texture of the meat. He savored the taste. The Marazar provided ample human flesh. They gave Offal the bodies of the ones they skinned. In contrast, Tiefling was a special treat. Wistfully, Offal hoped that Wistfully, Offal hopefully thought about eating the heart and liver of the female tiefling that provided the meat for the evening's feast. He hoped Gur would soon bring him the rest of the tiefling. Over the next few days, Offal tanned the skin and stuffed it with straw and cotton. He carefully pulled the clean bones from the amphora. Using gold and silver wire, he wound the bones into a spiral pattern with the largest bone on the outer edge. He created the charm using arcane spells and infernal potions. When complete, Offal admired his work. It was not his most powerful artifact Offal created over the decades, but it was the most impressive that he had made in years. So, hopefully you caught a bit of it. This was based upon the world of Tiglath with Marazar. So, Offal, the Marazar are the military force who's taken over the world of Tiglath. And Offal was the regimental jeweler, I guess is the best way to describe it. What happened is the Marazar were known for capturing their prisoners and skinning them alive. And the remains of the prisoners were often brought to Offal, and if they were high enough value, Offal would take their skulls and intricately clean them and embellish them to turn them into drinking cups. So that's the story of Tiefling Tale with Turnips. This actually happened to a character in my world. So what have you done? Would you try Tiefling Tale with turnips? Now I'll be honest, I've never eaten turnips. I actually asked my sister, who's a little bit older than I am, if she'd eaten turnips, and her reply was not voluntarily. The turnips were not something in our house that were served very frequently, but it sounded nice. Tiefling Tale with turnips. And this brings up the question: is it cannibalism to eat tiefling if you've killed it? And this is the other one about that I just did a short period ago, which was, is it cannibalism if a dwarf eats a hobbit? So this one was fun. I wrote this up, so I thought I'd tell you. I'll put the link to the actual blog where I did this. This was a few years ago. This was actually a lot of fun when I wrote this and when I ran this in the adventures. So I'd like to hear your comments. What do you think about this one? Like I said, it had a couple of adult themes in there, nothing terrible, but yeah, the actual adventure was much more brutal. Definitely not safe for work if you actually go looking through. It's one of the very early videos of my stuff. So, because we did that with Google Hangouts. So thank you for watching my video. I look forward to learning what you think about this video. Let me know in the comments below. If you like the video, press the thumbs up button. You can subscribe by clicking the link in the lower left. If you are interested, there are links to more content.